So I give my blessing to you all today. You've all come here out of faith in the Buddha Sasana, the Buddhist religion. And you've all come here together to help build and establish this monastery, Buddha Bodhivana Monastery. Tomorrow we will have the ceremony for the installation of the nimitta or marker stones for the Sima boundary. This is considered to be the completion of this building, this Ubosita Hall. And because the Ubosita Hall and the function of the hall lies at the heart of the monastery, we can say it's like the time where we complete the monastery by building this Ubosita Hall and establishing the Sima. It's that important. This is because it's a place for Sangha Karma, meaning a place where the monks can perform their transactions and meetings in appropriate and correct way according to their discipline. We also have come together to practice the Dhamma, to practice meditation and to hear the teachings. Here we're fortunate that we have Venerable Ajahn Kalyano as the abbot and teacher who can help to lead and guide us in our practice as we endeavour to develop our minds and our spiritual practice. To do this, we follow the Buddhist teachings. We base our practice on the practice of dana, generosity, sila, virtue, and bhavana, mental development or meditation. We also learn to develop kindness and compassion to help overcome our anger. And we have to develop insight, wisdom, to help us to see through and abandon our attachments, which are the cause of our suffering. If we're able to abandon any amount of greed, anger or delusion from our mind, this will be a cause for a coolness and a peace to arise in our minds. And we can say that it's the place where the Buddha arises within us. To do this, we have to develop what we call Pavanamaya Panya. This is the wisdom or the insight that arises from the peaceful mind, the clarity that comes through the peaceful, still mind in meditation. It's this kind of wisdom that is the cause for the end of the mental defilements. And it's the aim of all of us as Buddhists following the Buddhist path to develop this. The Lord Buddha himself overcame his own mental defilements and liberated himself from them to reach the end of suffering. Not only that, he was able to explain the Dhamma very well to others in great detail and in appropriate ways for other people to understand. The Buddha taught that all rupa, material things, and all nama, mental things, are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and without an owner. They're not self. As long as we don't see that truth, then we'll tend to attach to them. We'll attach to mental things, physical things. If we attach to physical things, say this body, it means we seek this body and look at it as a source of happiness, and we seek pleasure and happiness from this body. But when we do that, we're not seeing the other side, that it's also impermanent, it's unsatisfactory, and it's without a self, it's ownerless. We don't see that because of delusion and ignorance covering over the mind. So this is why we come to practice bhavana, or mental development, to develop the stillness, the peace and the calm that comes from when we focus our mind on an object of meditation. We might focus our awareness on the breathing, for instance, the sensation of the in and out breath. Or we might recite quietly the word Buddho. Or we might do it together. With the in-breath we recite Bud, with the out-breath we recite To. By concentrating the mind in this way on a meditation object, the mind can settle down and become peaceful. When it's peaceful like this, it abandons its thoughts about the past and things that have gone by, and the future, and all the planning and possibilities that the mind throws up about the future. Even though we have various duties in life towards our family, we have jobs and so on, it's still important for us to find the time to do this practice, to practice developing meditation, developing mindfulness. And the way the Buddha had us practice mindfulness was to develop mindful awareness in each posture, in each activity that we perform. That means we develop that awareness that we know what we're doing from moment to moment. We know what we're doing, we understand why we're doing it, what we're doing, what's the purpose. This is what we call the practice of Satipatthana as taught by the Lord Buddha. When we practice Satipatthana, or the practice of mindfulness, we're directing our mind to recollect or be mindful of the body, of feelings, the mind itself, and of dhammas, the objects of the mind. We develop this mindful awareness in every posture, and the more we develop this, the more we will experience peace and stillness. Sometimes the continuous practice of mindfulness in this way will allow different kinds of insight to arise, what we call sappava dhamma, just insight into the true nature of reality. We might experience insight into this body, seeing it walking along. We have the sense that there is no real self in charge of this body or owning this body. We'll see the body, our own body, moving around, but there's a sense as if there's no one there, there's no one home. Sometimes you might see this body as made up of just the four elements: the earth element, the air element, the heat element, and water element. And again, just seeing the lack of self in that, seeing that there's just a body made up of these four natural elements with no real being in ownership of that. This arises from the practice of mindfulness and investigation to develop an understanding of the true nature of reality. And this insight is the result of the practice. The Buddha taught this. The Lord Buddha said that if we practice mindfulness in this way, what we'll come to see is that there is no real self who owns this body. This body is not a person, it's not me or mine. It's just the grouping of these four elements without an owner. Whenever we see in this way, and whenever we have an insight in this way, it will give us some confidence and faith in the path and in the teachings. That will give us the energy to carry on practicing. Even if we have busy lives with many duties that we have to do, it's still something we have to practice. If we're going to follow in his footsteps, we should still try to find the time and direct the mind to contemplate these things and to develop mindfulness in this way. This is the way our faith and confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha will grow. And this is the path of practice that will lead to a firmness and unwavering confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And it's the way that will help us to develop a true insight, true understanding of truth. This firm conviction, confidence or faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha is the result of the practice. It becomes firmly established in one's heart. It's natural that sometimes we'll find practice is difficult. There'll be lapses in our mindfulness and we'll get caught up into the difficulties and obstacles of the practice. Sometimes the mind will not be firm in its faith and it will not be firm in its practice. But we must keep trying. The Buddha always said, one who keeps trying will manage to liberate themselves from suffering. Viriyena dukkha macchedi, famous teaching the Buddha gave. So we must keep learning to look back at this body and mind with mindfulness. Sometimes we'll see greed, anger or delusion arising. But look at these until you can see that these are just mental states or conditions of mind that arise and pass away. If we learn to watch over our minds like this, we'll see that all mental states that arise, they must pass away. We see how moods come up into the mind and affect it, take over the mind. This is what the Buddha pointed out. But we can also see that these things are what we call sankhara dhammas. They're conditions of mind. They're without any real owner or self. There's not a person or a being in them. They're just conditions that arise from certain causes. When those causes come, these conditions of mind arise. These different moods and mental states arise. If we can see it in this way, if we have this kind of insight, this is what allows us to let go of these different kinds of mood which cause us suffering. This is what we call pavanamaya panya, the wisdom that comes, or the insight that comes through the practice of meditation. It's this kind of insight, this profound insight, that helps us to actually abandon greed, anger and delusion from our minds. And what arises in its place is peace. And this is the way that we develop towards Nibbana. All of you are able to practice according to this way. You're all able to develop sila and samadhi and panya in this way. The important thing is to follow the Buddha's teachings. And the Buddha taught us all to be careful and heedful, particularly because life is very uncertain. We're all affected by old age, sickness, and one day we'll be affected by death. So we must look after our minds very carefully, take good care of them. Some people might find it very hard to meditate, but they can still maybe see the value of keeping the 5 precepts and living in a harmless way. Anyone who follows the 5 precepts, whether they meditate or not, and they will gain some happiness from this, and this will be a cause for them to understand the Dhamma on a deeper level as they let go of some of their coarser mental states and causes of suffering. To practice the 5 precepts, we can do this anywhere, whether we're at home, at work, even if we don't have time to go to the monastery or the temple, we can still practice them. With your jobs, you must try to practice samma jiva, a right livelihood, meaning the work you do and the money you earn it in a way that doesn't exploit others, harm others. If we practice in this way, trying to keep the precepts, follow right livelihood, and develop mindfulness, we say we're developing the internal samana, the one who's peaceful, or the internal monk or nun within us. One who has this sense of the internal monk or nun in them, they have an understanding of the meaning of the word enough. They understand that they have enough. They have this sense of contentment and harmlessness because they have this inner satisfaction and peace. They have this sense of enough. They don't need to bother anybody else or harm anybody else. When we ordain new monks in this hall, this is ordination that takes place on the external level, the conventional level. But as we practice the Dhamma, we're learning to develop the monk or nun on the internal level. That means we practice developing insight in this way until the mind can let go of its greed and anger and delusion. And this kind of final letting go we call samucceda pahana, where we completely uproot the causes of suffering, abandon greed, anger and delusion completely from our minds. So please determine to practice sincerely. Try to develop this knowledge and understanding that will help you to purify your own minds and make them peaceful. This is the way to find the inner monk or nun within your own heart, your own mind. So I'll just say this much for now and leave you with my blessing. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask Tanajan? Anything they want to know about? What is compassion? Compassion refers to the thought to help others out of suffering that they have fallen into or are experiencing. Metta, kindness, is a very closely related quality. It's a more of a positive well-wishing for others, oneself or others, not to experience suffering. Karuna is more directed to those who are experiencing suffering or heading into suffering, and it arises out of the development of our sensitivity and understanding through the development of our mindfulness and wisdom. Whatever skills and qualities and abilities we have, we direct them to helping others out of suffering. So for instance, the Lord Buddha himself, he had the realization that all beings are caught into what we call samsara, the never-ending round of birth and death, lifetime after lifetime. So, seeing that, realizing that, it arose what we call Mahakaruna, a very great compassion thought in his heart, to help beings find a way out of that endless round of birth and death and all the accompanying suffering. So that was the very inspiration that led him to become enlightened and then to go around teaching others out of compassion for them, seeing that beings are suffering, wanted to help them out of that suffering. Metta, Karuna and Mudita, Upekkha, these four qualities we call the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, divine dwelling places. These are all qualities that we develop in the heart and are particularly effective to helping overcome our own anger and attachments. And so all of them can be used as meditation themes, particularly for helping us to deal with and let go of our anger. Does that help? Any other questions? The four physical elements of the physical body can be used as meditation objects, individually or together. Generally, when we practice this, we separate each element out in our experience as we're contemplating, and we might just focus on one. So, for instance, contemplating the earth element, we focus on the hardness of the earth element as it manifests in our body. So, for instance, the bones are an example of the hardness of the earth element, just the hardness of bones, the solidity of bones. When we focus on the water element, we're focusing on the liquidity of the body. So particularly those liquids that are present in the body, and just the sense of the cohesion, like the glue between the solid parts. We have glue between them. The fire element, we're focusing on temperature, the heat, the coolness in the body. The air element, we're focusing on the movement in the body, the extension, the contraction within the body, and the movement around the body of the air element. When we focus our mind in this way, we're separating the body into its four component elements, and we recollect one or more of the elements with our mindfulness. If we practice that continuously and successfully, then the mind will gather together and become still and quiet and peaceful and firm. And this is the development of samadhi, or concentration. So in the beginning, this is still what we call samatha gammatana. It's like the practice of quietening the mind, stilling the mind, developing our mindfulness on just one object, so maybe just one of the four elements. Having developed this stillness, this peace of samadhi, then we can turn our mindfulness to recollect the truth about one or any of these elements. We can see that any of these elements are subject to change, they're impermanent. So we use mindfulness to recollect the impermanence, become aware and know the impermanence of these elements. And as we do this, gradually insight, clarity arises. This is what we call Pavana Maya Panya, the wisdom that comes from insight and from meditation. The more insight we have, the deeper it goes, then our attachment will gradually fade. The attachment meaning the attachment to this body as a self, or to that particular element, or the manifestations of that element as a self. So the bones maybe we begin to see they're just subject to change, they're not self, they're unsatisfactory, they're not self. And we can apply that reflection to all of this body. The end result is that we see clearly that this body is made up of 4 elements, and those elements are without an owner. They're not a person, a being, they're not me or mine, they're not a self. So this practice of contemplating the elements, if practiced continuously, can lead one to not only make the mind peaceful, but to actually realize the Dhamma and to end suffering. In the time of the Lord Buddha, it was a very common practice, both for monks and for lay people. There was one lay woman who practiced contemplating the elements. She would contemplate the elements, the bodies of all the animals and the corpses of animals she'd come across in the forest. So she'd see a falcon, a dead falcon, or a falcon flying in the forest, and she would just contemplate it as bones in the earth element. She might see a chicken, and she contemplated that as bones. So she's breaking through, by contemplating like this, breaking through the conventional reality, the labelling and the usual superficial attachment to experience, getting right down to the essence, the true essence of experience. By that way, contemplating in that way, samadhi arose, and using this to contemplate anicca dukkha anatta, she was able to realize the Dhamma. There was a question about whether we should just watch our minds as we practice and just allow thoughts to come and go, arise and pass away, or is it correct sometimes to actually resist certain thoughts that arise and definitely and deliberately try to abandon them? And Tenajan answered that yes, sometimes it is appropriate to consciously try to abandon certain thoughts. If you know it's a bad thought, a thought leading to suffering, then you try to abandon it, let it go from your mind, or resist it. And if it's a good thought, and you know it's a good thought, a skillful, wholesome thought, well, you can maintain that thought and develop it, keep it in your mind. But as we practice, it's natural that sometimes there'll be thoughts coming up, maybe very fast or in a very uncontrolled way, and there's nothing we can do. So at those times, your aim is to re-establish mindfulness and recollection as well as you can, as soon as you can. So you return to your meditation object. When you've got the chance, you turn to that to help quieten the mind. And you also use a lot of metta, kindness and patience directed towards yourself until you're able to work through those particular thoughts that are bothering you. By using metta in this way and patience, you can help your mind to just settle down, relax, and you'll find in time those thoughts that are bothering you will pass by and disappear. If you have a very agitated mind state that you can't control, the Buddha recommended to use the breathing. Just keep returning to the breath, recollecting, becoming mindful of the breath over and over again as the best way to deal with the agitated mind. But we can also do other contemplations. We can contemplate the elements, as I was explaining just now, to help focus the mind and to see the lack of self in this body. And again, this can help to counteract the thinking and proliferating states of mind we get caught into. if our mindfulness is not strong, then it's very difficult to contemplate thoughts, to see whether they're good or bad, to do anything at all with them. It's just too difficult. So for much of our practice, especially in the beginning when mindfulness is not strong, our main effort should be directed to just returning to sati, to developing mindfulness with the breath or our meditation object, and keep doing that. If we keep doing that, it will give us some strength of mind to deal with a lot of thinking, agitated thinking and mental proliferation. It says in the beginning the best thing is just to begin with the earth element. Just focus on that in your body, in your mind. Closing your eyes, focus on the hardness, say, of the bones and other parts of the body which are clearly made up of the earth element. So it could be the hair, the bones and so on. Just keep focusing on that in the beginning. If this still doesn't hold your attention and your mind is still distracted, not very peaceful, well, try the next one, try the water element. And again, try to hold your attention on the water element, visualize it, get to know that element in your body. And you can proceed through the other elements. As long as your mind is not peaceful, you can try maybe moving from one element to the next. But what you'll find is you have to keep observing, and over time you'll find that there's one particular element or one aspect of an element which really does hold your attention more than the others, and you'll sense that your mind settles down more, say just contemplating the earth element or the water element and so on. And once you start to recognize which element is holding your attention more, then you tend to just focus on that. But in the beginning you might experiment and move between the different elements until you're more familiar with the practice. Tila yang diไหมครับ? Yeah, good idea. Just one element at a time is a good idea. There was a question about someone who tried to commit suicide last week. What can we do to help someone in that situation? Tanajan suggested to remind them of how valuable human life is. Even though sometimes we do get caught into terrible suffering and depression, the Buddha always reminded us that this human birth is of great value, very difficult to achieve a human birth. It's not something that comes easily. Having been born, it's a great opportunity to do good, to develop oneself further on one's spiritual path towards enlightenment. So when we do face suffering and difficulties, we have to use patience and effort and always reflect back on what is the meaning of life or the purpose of life, and to see that we have to do good and develop ourselves. Should also try to reflect on the fact that when you destroy life, say committing suicide is destroying a life, your own life, all you're doing is destroying the body, the physical aspect of our human being. It doesn't destroy the mind, it doesn't change the mind, it just destroys the body. What you're doing as you destroy the body, or try to destroy the body, is you're increasing your own delusion, your sense of self, and the causes for further suffering. So you're actually doing more harm to yourself by trying to commit suicide. You're not ending the suffering that you want to get rid of. So you have to encourage that person to try to contemplate, to see more clearly what they're doing until they can let go of that wish to kill themselves. Then Tan said that everything he said they refused to listen to. They don't agree, they don't accept whatever he said. So Ajahn said, well, this is also karma. We have to accept that everybody has their karma, and if they've reached that point where they're trying to commit suicide, well, that's a very strong, powerful karma that they're responsible for. But at the same time, many people do change, and that's the hope. If you do know someone in that situation, you can try to help them and give them this kind of advice, and sometimes they take it. It's a seed that goes into their mind, and they do change for the better and give up the idea of committing suicide. That's probably enough teaching for today, but if anyone would like a book and a photograph, Jen will be happy to give you one before you leave, so please come forward.